exile all together from the plain, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitors, up with the stars. We will reel around the flag, boys, and relay once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom.
All right. It's been about a month, I think. Yeah, about 3 weeks? Yeah, about 3 weeks. We are back with Uncut. It is Thursday. It is 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We are back on the TubeU and the Rumble. We are streaming live with the beginning of a series of special editions of Uncut History. I know what you're thinking. Didn't you just say earlier this week you weren't going to stream? That's what I thought, and then I forgot I had already planned to do this special series of streams, and if I didn't do it this week, then the other streams could not happen. We'll explain about that a bit later. Let's see. We got Wrangler. Oh, man. Wrangler tuning in and gifting us with a 1420. Thank you very much, Wrangler. Thank you for tuning in. Hope things are doing well as you right now. You're in the promotion process to get your second book sold, if I'm not mistaken. And then we have the ghost of Howard's right arm here to haunt us. And we also have a Humble Collector, our co-host on the Heterochromedia podcast and often collaborator here in the channel, often chauffeur for most editions or retracing history, especially the Brandywine video. You probably saw him make a cameo at the very end of it, and he's going to enjoy a nutritious cigar because, after all, we are going to be talking about probably the history's most well-known chain smoker. That's right, Ulysses S. Grant. Yay. What are you doing on my swamp? What swamp? What swamp? Oh, the wilderness. Well, this is Spotsylvania County and Orange County's wilderness up in Virginia. Not to be confused with all that is Tennessee, all the wonders of Tennessee. Oh. And though, just for the record, I do not condone the consumption of alcohol, the use of tobacco, or any other drugs. Readout Productions is an educational channel for all ages. But since, Humble Collector's here, this is the humidor I was talking about. It's all set, ready to go. It's great. It's great. All to be saved for a special occasion. This one's pretty close to a special occasion, but it's Thursday. We still got another day of work, and I got several more college assignments to turn in. I don't know, Billy. Tomorrow might be a special occasion because I'm gonna have to get through the wonderful sunshine and rainbows that is Deluxe Volume 5 of Berserk. Anyways. So, what are we talking about? What's all this special string stuff I'm talking about? Well, May and June of 2024 is the 160th anniversary of the Overland Campaign, one of the most bloody military operations to ever occur involving the United States of America. At the very least, it is the most devastating campaign during the American Civil War. So, when we talk about the American Civil War here on Readout Productions, be it here on Uncut History or when we actually get to go out and visit the battlefields during Retracing History, we usually talk about events building up to a major battle. There'd be a lot of skirmishes before and after it, but typically there's one major battle. Perfect example, Gettysburg. You have in 1863, you had the Union Confederate armies making their way out of Virginia. Robert E. Lee and the Confederate Army wanted to invade Pennsylvania to threaten the Union states to try to force some type of willingness amongst the population to sue for peace. The Union Army, however, was able to cut them off in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, in a brutal 3-day bloody battle. 7,000 Americans were killed. 44,000 were wounded, missing, or another form of casualties. And the Confederate Army was forced to turn back south, and the Union Army chased them the whole way back down. That's like your traditional Civil War campaign in the first years of the war. Don't be wrong. You would have several major battles happen, but usually it was a build up, boom, and now we're just going to start to deflate because our supplies are running low. Well, this is going to be a little bit different. It's 1864. We're now into the 4th year of conflict. Things are getting very, very desperate in the United States of America, as well as the Confederate States of America, which is trying to gain its independence. And well, the Union are getting very, very, very tired of dealing with the Confederacy, especially because 1864 is going to be an election year for the United States of America. The first election since 11 of the United States seceded in protest over a previous election result. So, things are a little tense, especially with President Abraham Lincoln. And 4 years into the war, there's no real end in sight. While the Confederacy has not fully gotten its independence, at the same time, the Union hasn't been doing a great job in completely dismantling the Confederacy. And if you excuse me one moment, my earbuds are completely messed up. I don't know why. So, yes, 1864, an election year of the United States of America, 4th year of the American Civil War. Things are tense, and there is a growing faction against Lincoln's administration. That 4 years into this war, there's no real solution to it. Why are we fighting this? If the South wants to be independent and keep slavery, just let them have it. There is this growing attitude, particularly with the Democrats who had stayed with the Union, as well as more moderate Republicans that are questioning a lot of Lincoln's strategies. In addition to establishing the Emancipation Proclamation, there's also people being very leery of the suspension of habeas corpus. That was not very popular amongst people in the Union states. So Lincoln needs decisive victories. He needs the Confederacy to be destroyed by the end of 1864, or at the very least on the course to absolute destruction. In the Eastern Theater, which is in the main view of all of the major press outlets, both for the Union and the South and the Confederacy, it's not really going well. You would have these battles. Robert E. Lee, leading the Confederate Army in North Virginia, seemed to always find some way to survive. Not necessarily always win battles, but found the way that he would bludgeon the Union enough and then sneak away. And although the Union had won at Gettysburg, they had decisively driven Lee and the Confederates out of Pennsylvania and back across the Potomac River, it was at a very, very heavy price. And so much so, they actually had to heavily reorganize the Army of the Potomac, the Union's main fighting force against Robert E. Lee. And we'll talk a bit more about that going into the Battle of the Wilderness. Lincoln does not trust many of the generals in the Eastern Theater. He needs a general that's willing to not just fight Lee, but is not scared of blood loss and will tie him down and is willing to do whatever it takes to obliterate him. Enter Ulysses S. Grant. Now, we have been following Ulysses S. Grant's rise through the ranks in the Union Army through various streams on Uncut History. We have had a stream on Shiloh. We've had a stream on the battles for Chattanooga. We've also got a little bit of an idea of what happens when Robert E. Lee is at his best on his home turf in Northern Virginia. We got to talk about that with the Battle of Chancellorsville. If you've seen these 3 editions of Uncut History, Shiloh, Chancellorsville, and Chattanooga, keep what you've learned in mind, is that it's all going to come to play here in these next several streams. So Ulysses S. Grant is a winning general, at least in the eyes of the Lincoln administration. He wins battles, is essentially what Lincoln said. I can't spare him. He wins battles. I think one time there was people were complaining early on in Grant's career. They're complaining to Lincoln, you got a darn drunk winning. The only guy winning battles out west is a darn drunk. This is horrible for the Union. To which Lincoln asked, what type of whiskey does he prefer? Just like, please, just give me anything. Give me any victory. So Ulysses S. Grant is coming east. He also has a new promotion. He is now general of the United States Army. He is in charge of all military officials in the United States Army, be it people out west in the Army, my brain's already giving me flats, be it out west in the Army of the Cumberland, the old Army of Mississippi, all of those divisions out there, or be it back east, the Army of the Potomac. So he's coming in. He is now eventually he'll go down in history as being the only man to rival George Washington in terms of American military rank. So he's coming east. He's in charge. He's the boss of all of the armies the United States has at their disposal at this time. But he chooses he is going to attach his headquarters. He's not just going to stay in an office in D.C. He wants to still be in the battlefield. And he is going to attach his headquarters to the Army of the Potomac, an army that needs to win. This is the army that has to absolutely win and take out the one major thing keeping the Confederacy together, and that is Robert E. Lee's Army in Northern Virginia. So, with that being said, let's dive in. I got a nice little slideshow that I totally did not throw together this afternoon. I was enjoying some nice Arnold Palmer. And thank you, by the way, Lieutenant Bob is joining us over on the Rumble. Thank you for using the alternate platform. So here we are, the wilderness. Tail of the tape. Here are two warring commanders. Off to your left is Robert E. Lee, commander of the Confederate Army in Northern Virginia, born in Stamford Hall in Virginia in 1864. He's 57 years old, but don't let the age scare you. He has the slight advantage of military experience, having been involved in the military since 1829. He served in the Mexican-American War, and some of his most notable achievements by the spring of 1864. Interestingly enough, you may not recall this one, John Brown's capture. What does that have to do with any of this? That's before the Civil War. Well, you know I like bringing up John Brown. There's a stream. He's one of them fascinating individuals. It's just worth talking about. And when John Brown raided the federal arsenal and armory to try to kickstart a uprising of slaves in what was then Virginia, now parts of West Virginia, it was Robert E. Lee who was sent out by then President Buchanan to plot a way to capture Brown, and Lee was successful in doing that. Capturing Brown, although Brown's capture and later execution, many argue, including myself, expedited the country to American Civil War because Brown's fiery speeches in the final months of his life tore the nation asunder. Abolition factions became pro-Brown, while people in the South became fearful of more attempts to cause slave revolts. Later on, Robert E. Lee, he had a smaller rank in the Confederate Army, actually did not do so well in 1861. Bad times in 1861, trying to hold on to West Virginia. Obviously, he failed at that mission. But when the commander of the Army in North Virginia, Joe Johnston, was put out of action with a wound, Robert E. Lee stood up. And, well, he conducted a series of maneuvers around the Union Army, then commanded by George B. McClellan, from the city of Richmond, which looked to be on the cusp of surrender. He outmaneuvered McClellan's Union Army in just 7 days for a series of battles that demoralized McClellan and made him quit this very, very expensive Union offensive against Richmond. It was the first major amphibious operation the United States of America had ever conducted. And also when it was all for nothing because McClellan lost his nerve, which greatly infuriated Lincoln. Then, of course, he'll go on a chain of victories. He defeats a small Union army at Second Manassas. He's then going to invade the North for the first time, although that did not actually go too well for him. But he will get some redemption because he's going to make a masterful defense of Fredericksburg, Virginia, which sits along the Rappahannock River just outside the boundaries of Spotsylvania County. It's not technically in Spotsylvania County. Fredericksburg is one of them real weird cities that it's its own separate identity from the surrounding county anyways. So he is going to make a masterful defense of Fredericksburg, preventing the Union Army of Potomac from holding on to the city for too long. And then in the May of 1863, just 10 miles west of Fredericksburg, he's going to make what many consider his greatest victory, the Battle of Chancellorsville, where it seemed that he was about to be smashed, compressed in on multiple sides by the Army of the Potomac, now commanded by Joseph Hooker. Well, Hooker lost his nerve. And Lee took advantage of it, dividing his army to completely catch Hooker off guard, including a massive flanking maneuver led by General Stonewall Jackson. By the way, that maneuver happened exactly 161 years ago today, but we already did a stream about that last year, so you go check it out later on. It's great, and it all leads to what we're talking about today. Battle of Chancellorsville, a massive Confederate victory, forcing the Army of the Potomac to withdraw back into Pennsylvania, although it was at a heavy price. And since then, Robert E. Lee, he's kind of in a bit of a denial. He still thinks he has the army of late 1862, but after these several bloody victories that he achieved, he is then going to suffer a catastrophic defeat in Gettysburg. And although Lee does not want to admit it, his army has yet to fully recover. But even the soldiers, the average private in the Army of Northern Virginia, which by the spring of 1864 is numbering about 61,000, which is a bit of a downgrade from the year previous. It had almost 70,000 men when it invaded Pennsylvania and went to Gettysburg. So just a slight depreciation of numbers. But a lot of these guys are still adamant that, hey, we keep bludgeoning the Union Army. Even after they wiped us out at Gettysburg, they weren't able to pursue. We got them on the run. We got them fatigued. They're scared of old Bobby Lee. So that's the attitude of Robert E. Lee and the Army of North Virginia in spring of 1864. They're kind of in a bit of denial on what's happening around them. They still think they're invincible, even though that was proven otherwise back at Gettysburg. Fighting out of the blue corner, we have Ulysses S. Grant, who is now commander of all Union soldiers at this point, of all American armies, United States armies, I should say, from Point Pleasant, Ohio. No, not the Point Pleasant where Mothman's from. That's West Virginia. Got a whole video about that. He is 42 years old when he takes charge of all Union armies. And he has about a 10-year disadvantage in terms of experience. He debuted in the United States Army in 1839, 10 years after Robert E. Lee. But Grant is the winningest general in the American Army at this point, or at least that's what he and the Lincoln administration boast. Capturing two critical Confederate forts guarded the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers in early 1862, leading to the Battle of Shiloh. While Grant was heavily criticized for being caught off guard at Shiloh by a large Confederate army, he was able to turn it around and prompt a massive counterstrike that obliterated what was then the Army of Mississippi, soon to be renamed the Army of Tennessee. The Army of Tennessee. And that's why I put it as a big victory. And well, eventually he is going to surround the key Mississippi River port of Vicksburg and compel its surrender by the summer of 1863. By doing so, the Confederacy was torn in two, no longer able to easily send equipment and supplies across from the greater part of the Confederacy over to Texas. And then, of course, we have the battles for Chattanooga, which was kind of basically... I don't think I have do I have the clip? Do I have the wolf clip? I had a clip during our Chattanooga, but Harvey Keitel, Pulp Fiction. I don't think I have the clip anymore. Darn. I had a clip when we did Chattanooga, which summed up Grant's performance at Chattanooga, which the Union Army at Chattanooga was doing pretty good, but they surprisingly got defeated by the unlikely Confederate forces of Braxton Bragg, and they were compelled to withdraw into the city. So when a Union army is in trouble, you call up the wolf. And I used the Harvey Keitel meme of him driving over to Jimmy's house in Pulp Fiction to solve problems, but it had Grant's face over it. It was really funny when you saw it. It's really cringy when I describe it. Anyways, Grant went in there, mopped up that problem, kicked Braxton Bragg off the heights surrounding Chattanooga, and opened a gateway to the Deep South, which William Tecumseh Sherman, Grant's close friend, is getting ready to go down that gateway the same time Grant has come east to supervise the Army of the Potomac, which has over 100,000 soldiers. So Grant has the advantage in numbers. But does Grant truly control the Army of the Potomac? Hey, Scott's Odyssey, thank you for tuning in. Yeah, I always got to make a Mothman joke. It's fun to talk about the Mothman. who's really in charge of the Army of the Potomac? Now, Grant is the superior commander in this situation, but the commander of the actual Army of the Potomac is a guy by the name of George Gordon Meade, who's photographed over on the right. George Meade took charge on June 28th, 1863. Why did I throw that date out? Because that's just a few days before the Battle of Gettysburg would occur. Meade did not want this job. He was like, can you find somebody else? And Lincoln's like, well, everybody else has turned me down. So either you accept the promotion or you're being fired. And he's like, all right, I guess I'll take the job. So Meade did not want the job. And as is a rule of thumb, if somebody does not want the job, typically that means they're going to do a pretty decent job at their performance because they want to get out of work. So they want to do it as quickly and as sloppy as possible so they don't have to come back and clean up their errors. So that's a rule of thumb. Meade took a job he did not necessarily want. And the Army of the Potomac up to this point had gone through a cycle of generals. Just naming them off the top of my head, we had George B. McClellan, who actually once was the general of the U.S. Army, the position that Grant is now hosted in 1864. Well, he completely messed up that role, and Lincoln kicked him out of its position. So afterwards, the next commander of the Army of the Potomac was a guy by the name of Burnside, Ambrose Burnside, who will come up in our story today. Mr. Burnside, he wept when Lincoln gave him the promotion because he's like, oh God, I'm going to do a horrible job. And he did a horrible job at Fredericksburg. They really should have taken a notice there when a guy's bursting in tears in sadness for getting a lucrative promotion. So Burnside was gone. Next came Joseph Hooker, who, hey, he seemed really good at organizing the army. He's given them icons to denote the different corps, which is giving a morale boost so men now have something to fight for, not just some mythical cause that's just kind of like there, the cause. No, we're fighting for the First Corps. We're fighting for our buddies here. So that definitely improved morale in the Army of the Potomac, but it didn't really translate too well to actual battlefield performance. Cough, cough, Chancellorsville, and Hooker was out of action. Enter George Meade, who is going to defeat Lee. He is the man that defeats Lee. He is the victor of Gettysburg. We got to get this information out more, guys. Everybody wants to freaking talk about Robert E. Lee. They talk about Lee all day at Gettysburg. He's the guy that lost. Nobody talks about the guy who won. And this really, really ticks me off. And it's not just because I'm biased, because Meade is from Pennsylvania. Anyways, well, actually, he's born in Spain. That's a story for another day. That's a story for another day. He's born in Spain, but he's in Pennsylvania. I don't have time for that. I don't have time. Oh my God, we're almost half hour in. We haven't even gotten to the wilderness. Oh. So, Meade will retain his command of the Army of the Potomac after the Battle of Gettysburg, and Lincoln is on him like, come on, you just made Robert E. Lee quit the field. This is not happened. Please chase him, tie him down, defeat him. He's bleeding. But what Lincoln failed to realize was the Army of the Potomac was badly mauled, equally, if not worse so, than the Army of Northern Virginia after Gettysburg. So Meade was slow to chasing Lee. Lee got across the Potomac. Meade and Lee are going to try to set each other up for one final battle, but really just imagine two very, very sluggish boxers, and they're just doing this for like the last 3 rounds of a boxing match. That's the fall of 1863. Meade and Lee just moving their troops around, and they just don't like where they're located. There's some skirmishing near Fredericksburg, but it really doesn't work out, which really infuriates Lincoln, which is why Lincoln made Grant general of the U.S. armies and is sending him to monitor Meade. Now, Meade is very uneasy about this. He's like, and I think we could all relate to this. We don't like people bearing down our necks when we're trying to do our job. Just let us do our job. We can get it done right. Stop scrutinizing us because it makes us nervous. Now it's going to make us do mistakes. So Meade, when he first meets Grant, Meade directly tells him like, well, I don't feel that I should be here anymore. I am more than happy to relinquish my position and bug out. I just don't feel comfortable. Grant tries to assure Meade, I'm not here to take charge of the Army of the Potomac. I am merely here to ensure that you succeed in defeating Robert E. Lee. The only instructions I have for you is wherever Lee goes, there you will go also. And that is the strategy that sets up the Overland Campaign. Grant is going to try and let, at least at the start, kind of let Meade do his own thing with the Army of the Potomac. Just long as he keeps on the heels of Lee, there will be no turning back. All right, so the Wilderness, May 1864. What is Ulysses S. Grant's strategy that he wants Meade to achieve? Well, since the winter of late 1863, the Confederate and Union armies have laid along the Rapidan River, which you kind of see there. It's in the upper middle portion. It's cutting through, widening through the Rapidan River just above Fredericksburg, Virginia. So they've been sitting on opposite sides of the river. No real different from the previous 2 years of the war. They sit on opposite sides of the river near Fredericksburg. This is like a thing that this is the middle portion of the American Civil War. All roads go back to Fredericksburg. Why? Because Fredericksburg is perfectly in between D.C. and Richmond, the two competing capitals. Anyways, Grant's idea is he's not going to want to attack Lee frontally. Along the Rapidan River, Lee is on high ground. I think it's on what they call Clint Mountain. So he's on these high bluffs overlooking the river. Grant is not going to do a frontal attack. And I even think Lee somewhat knows this, that like, yeah, Grant's in charge. He's not going to just throw himself into my front. He's probably going to outflank me. There's two ways Grant can go about outflanking Lee. One, he could try an approach that nobody's expecting to the west. The problem with moving west, which would mean moving off this map and trying to move into the Blue Ridge Mountains to try to outflank Lee, is that you're going to be pretty far away from Richmond. You're going to be hyperextending your supply lines, which is the one major thing that is allowing the Army of the Potomac to wipe out the Army of North Virginia's time, to always whip them. The Army of North Virginia are just not able to sustain themselves in one location as long as the Army of the Potomac can. So Grant wants to stay near his supply chain, stay near to D.C., resupplying him continually, bringing in fresh troops, bringing in fresh foods. That really leaves one more road. And that road, unfortunately, goes through a patch of forest known as the Wilderness. Now, the Wilderness is a location that is no stranger to Robert E. Lee or George Meade. It's about 70 square miles of forest. And this isn't a forest that you're expecting. This is not old growth forest, with big trees with large gaps in between and dark. It's not old growth. The Wilderness, which grows up west of Fredericksburg in the late 18th century, was heavily trimmed up by locals who were using the old growth wood for charcoal for small blast furnace operations. And again, if you heard us talk about Chancellorsville last year, we would have talked about this. There was some fighting around Carried Furnace, one of the blast furnaces in the area. And in fact, let's go back to that map briefly. You can actually make out that the Wilderness, no, not that one. Oh my God. This one. If you look closely at the map, you will see Chancellorsville's dead center in the map. The Chancellorsville is technically in the Wilderness. So there's already been a major battle on the eastern fringes of the Wilderness. The problem is, by the mid-19th century during the American Civil War, all that old growth has been torn up, cut up. For a while, this area was actually barren. But in the past 30 or so years, it's begun to grow back again. Mother Nature is going to always try to heal herself. And when she does, it is usually going to be manifested in the form of thickets, thorns, your poison oak and ivy, because it's trying to keep creatures from going back and disturbing the surface. It's trying to protect it. That's why all that stuff happens in the forest, why all these jaggers grow and stuff. It is nature trying to protect the ground from being tampered with anymore. So in the past 30 years leading up to the American Civil War, this second growth has risen in this 70 square miles. So very thick underbrush. Trees aren't really too high. There are some tall ones, of course, but most of them are only a little bit taller than the soldiers. We're looking at more like saplings than anything else. So it's highly difficult to move large bodies of people for this particular sprawl of forest. All right, back to the image. But nevertheless, Ulysses' S. grand strategy calls for the Army of the Potomac to cross the Rapidan River under cover of darkness, try to move themselves quickly into the wilderness, which would mask their movement if the Confederates were not aware of what Grant was trying to tell Meade to do. And Grant hopes Meade can get the Army of the Potomac safely through the wilderness, south somewhere around the location you see at the bottom of the map called Spotsylvania Courthouse, where he can swing into open country, cut off Robert E. Lee's escape route to the south to the Confederate capital, Richmond, surround him, and defeat him. That is what Grant wants Meade to achieve here in early May of 1864. Now, something that needs to be understood is the Army of the Potomac is not what it was a few years ago. While there definitely are veteran, disciplined soldiers and officers, those veteran units are pretty well whittled down from 3 years of campaigning. And what you're going to be left with is, patchworks. And it really doesn't work out too well when you're trying to command a whole army. So in early 1864, the Army of the Potomac would be completely reorganized. 2 whole corps. And on average, a corps has about 10,000 men apiece, at least ideally. So that's about 20,000 soldiers. 2 whole Union Corps were dissolved. Why? Well, it's because they weren't meeting that 10,000 man quota. It's because a certain somebody, his name may or may not be Dan the Man Sickles, decided to move the Union 3rd Corps 3/4 of a mile beyond where Meade wanted them at Gettysburg onto open ground that made them easy targets for the entire Confederate right wing. I wonder what that would do to a Union Corps. So anyways, the 1st and 3rd Corps were so badly mauled from Gettysburg. My God, it is off after 8:30. Why are you still driving motorcycles? Anyways, so the 1st and 3rd Union Corps were completely dissolved due to their heavy losses from Gettysburg and ensuing campaigns. And what was left of these corps, divisions and brigades and even individual regiments were kind of spread out across the Army of the Potomac. The Army of the Potomac that's going to march into the wilderness on May 4th, 1864 is not as large as it's used to. It's a very mean-looking army. It's not large. Now, granted, it's 100,000 men, but it's much more mean-looking. It really is only made up of 3 corps. That consists of the old 2nd Corps, commanded by Winfield Scott Hancock, who is highly admired by some troops. Is definitely seen as one of the old war horses for the Lincoln administration by this point. So Hancock isn't always a tried and tested go-to. If there's a situation, he can be put in charge of the head of the army. He's your go-to second in command. So you got Hancock's old 2nd Corps of a lot of old veterans. You're also, and when I say old, I mean these guys are probably just hitting their early 20s now. But, 3 years of war will do a lot to a man. You're then going to have the Union 5th Corps, commanded by Gouverneur K. Warren. Mr. Warren was once an engineer officer for the Union Army, but has since now taken direct charge over one of the infantry corps. Mr. Warren is going to have some interesting involvement with the forthcoming battle. That's the kind of thing I can say. And then you're going to have the Union 6th Corps, which is commanded by John Sedgwick. And the Union 6th Corps is really not, in terms of a corps, have not done a lot in the American Civil War. Normally, they often were broken up, and you would see a portion of the 6th Corps reinforcing maybe the 1st Corps or the 2nd Corps or the 3rd Corps in a battle, like Gettysburg. But since the 1st and 3rd Corps are no longer in existence, the 6th Corps is now going to get its time to shine. And if you recall my Chancellorsville video, we actually talked about one of the first major battles the 6th Corps was in. The 6th Corps cracked the code of Marie's Heights, that high ground that Lee used to defend against the Union attacks on Fredericksburg. So I always have a soft spot for the 6th Corps. I think historians tend to overlook them, neglect them, not to give them enough credit. These are the guys that cracked the code of Marie's Heights. These guys are about to shine in the Overland Campaign. These guys are about to become the main characters of the Overland Campaign. I'm probably going to talk about them a little too much in the coming weeks. Anyways, so that is the Army of the Potomac. It's much more lean than it was in previous years. So you got these soldiers that are not fully comfortable. Let's say you have ex-Third Corps guys being thrown in at the Second Corps. They're not really too comfortable with that because of the brand identity to their corps. So there is unrest in the ranks of the Union Army as they march into the wilderness. Well, funny story. Moving 100,000 soldiers, you're going to be noticed. And indeed, Robert E. Lee catches wind of what Grant is trying to achieve through General Meade. And this kind of shows you the troop placements throughout May the 4th. And I also show you the proximity the wilderness forest is to key locations like DC, Richmond, and Winchester. So, throughout May the 4th, the Army of the Potomac is trying to move as quickly as possible across the Rapidan River. They're trying to move into the wilderness. And when you get into the wilderness, really the only places of open ground are the road networks. There's a couple key roads, which you'll see on the map here. I'm actually going to blow it up. So going from left to right, which is west to east, you'll notice we have two parallel roads. That's the Orange Turnpike. And then right underneath, you have the Orange Plank Road. And both of these cut right through the wilderness from southwest to northeast. The Turnpike, which is to the north, will eventually intersect with the Brock Road. Kind of with the Brock Road at a place known as Wilderness Tavern. The Plank Road will continue through Park Store, intersects through the Brock Road, and actually keeps continuing east until it unifies with the Turnpike, and then the Plank and Turnpike go right into Chancellorsville and down to Fredericksburg. So there's that old Chancellorsville battlefield we talked about last year. Wow, it's crazy to think that we're actually doing this almost in real time. We talked about Chancellorsville last year, and now we're talking about this year. If you ride a bike, you'll know why he is riding. It's fair. So, moving on. So here comes the Army of the Potomac. They're trying to sneak their way in for the wilderness. By sneaking, they're not really sneaking. Lee quickly realizes what's happening, but Lee is in a bit of predicament because Grant is not just in charge of the Army of the Potomac. Grant is also in charge of the 9th Corps, commanded by General Burnside. Yay, General Burnside. And Burnside's being really, really picky right about now in 1864. So he's not really well liked by the soldiers, at least not by guys outside of his own corps. He is known as the guy who completely lost at Fredericksburg, burst into tears just because he was given promotion. And he had this weird idea called the Mud March, which he was going to try to outflank Robert E. Lee in January during a thunderstorm. Funny story. Trying to move cannons through the mud don't work out too well. That kind of ended his time commanding the Army of the Potomac. But since he was a former commander of the Army of the Potomac, his rank technically outranked George Gordon Meade. So it was awkward to try to put the 9th Corps back into the Army of the Potomac. So to appease Burnside, what they did was they had the 9th Corps answer directly to Grant, while the 2nd, 5th, and 6th Corps answer the Meade, who would then answer the Grant. I see no problems coming from this. Anyways. So the reason I bring that up is Burnside's hanging out in front of the Rapidan River, and that's making Lee nervous. So Lee's like, I can't just send my whole army in North Virginia east to cut off Grant's movements. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to leave at least a portion of my army near Clark Mountain facing off against Burnside, and then I can free up the rest of my army to engage the Union. Now, Lee is going to have an advantage. He's going into the wilderness. While it's going to suck trying to maneuver troops in the wilderness, kind of means the number advantage that the Army of the Potomac has is gone. That 100,000 means nothing when you're in dense thickets. So Lee's hope at this time is to cut off the Brock Road and prevent Grant, and therefore the Army of the Potomac, from moving south and outflanking him. This sets up the Battle of the Wilderness. 40 minutes in, we got to the wilderness. Yay. Yay. We're at the battle. 40 minutes in. I need a drink of water. In the early morning hours of May 5th, 1864, the Army of the Potomac is spread out and camped through the wilderness. The Fifth Corps are camped near Wilderness Tavern, interestingly enough, where the arm of Stonewall Jackson is buried. Not all of Jackson, just his arm, which was severed the year prior during a friendly fire incident near Chancellorsville. The Sixth Corps are also making their way down. They're just near the ford of the Rapidan River. And the Union Second Corps, commanded by Hancock, they're camped on the old Chancellorsville battlefield, kind of out of view east of this map. Well, General Meade is going to again getting information from scouts that there is a considerable Confederate force just a few yards down the turnpike from his encampment. And Meade tells Warren it's probably a good idea you go out there and investigate. Warren looks at Meade and goes, dude, I can't see anything. I can't tell if the enemy's down there. I can't tell you if Mothman's in the forest. I am not going down there. Let's just keep moving south. And Meade's like, no, dude, go deploy your corps. We don't want the Confederates attacking us. We don't want them cutting us off from our escape to the Rapidan River. Go out and scream. So Warren's none too enthused. So he begrudgingly gets his corps together, I should say, the 5th Union Corps, and he starts moving west down the Brock Road. Now, eventually, his corps will come into one of the few fields in the wilderness area. It's called Saunders Field. It's a cornfield, but there's nothing growing in it right now because it's just May. The Saunders family haven't done anything with it yet. So this gives them a rare opportunity to actually see more than a few feet ahead of them. And, well, they don't like what they see ahead of them. They can see the glinting of muskets and some artillery pieces, and they can definitely make out the Confederate flags. Although these Confederate soldiers are trying to keep hunkered down low to the ground, who have also, by the way, dug some small earthworks to protect their front overnight. Yeah, Warren quickly realizes, well, anyways, Warren, obeying Meade's orders, is going to order his corps forward. The 5th Corps advance into Saunders Field. And Saunders Field, what's interesting about it, I think we have an image next one over. This is Saunders Field. Photograph, we don't know when it was quite taken, sometime between the 1880s and the 1930s, but this gives you a good idea what it looked like and what the wilderness looked like surrounding these armies. How Saunders Field's set up, there's actually what the veterans would later call the damn gully, the wretched gully, because the field actually depresses before rising up to where the Confederates are. And by the way, the Confederates would be at the tree line in this photograph. So again, fun times being with the 5th Corps in May of 1864. And around 6 in the morning on May 5th, the Battle of the Wilderness has begun. Lee has made contact with the Confederate Army through various units of Richard Ewell's 2nd Corps. By the way, Richard Ewell's Corps, this is the old corps that Stonewall Jackson once commanded. So food for thought on that. We all know what happened to Jackson in the wilderness last year over near Chancellorsville. It's like I'm foreshadowing. It's like that totally a friendly fire incident involving and made the second in command of the Confederate Army. That wouldn't happen to happen twice at the same location. Nah. That's Hollywood for you. So yes, the Battle of Saunders Field erupts. Now the 5th Corps, of course, are made up of 3 different divisions. They're trying to rush across this field to get into the shelter of the trees, even though that means they'll be muzzle to muzzle with the enemy, but it's safer to being out in the open. They're initially able to break into the trees, push the 1st Confederate forces back, but timely arrival of Georgians that are under the command of John B. Gordon are going to start pushing the 5th Corps back into the open, where they're at the mercy of Confederate crossfire. Because not just are the Confederates to the west of the field, but are also to the north and to the south. So now they're starting to completely surround Warren and his 5th Corps. Now, I have to pull my high-tech notes out. I hope you guys don't mind. My highly efficient, high-tech notes. One of the commanders that was in this engagement in Saunders Field is a guy by the name of Romaine B. Aries. Aries had enjoyed being a division commander back in 1863 during events like the Battle of Gettysburg and its aftermath. Remember how I said that the Army of the Potomac looked more mean, more lean than it did the year prior due to having to restructure? Well, that also included demotions. Yeah. So not demotion because people were doing anything necessarily bad, but so ranks weren't conflicting with each other. Since there weren't as many units to command anymore, men like Ares lost control of divisions and they were sent down to command brigades. This happened to several officials, not just in the 5th Corps, but throughout the Army of the Potomac. And they were very, very ticked off at Grant because of this. So food for thought. So these guys were none too enthused to be out there in Saunders Field that morning, and now they're being cut to pieces. Ares had commanded a division the year prior known as the Regular Division. These were guys of the U.S. Regular Army, not your, these were guys that had been actually worked through the U.S. Army before the American Civil War. So, not your volunteers, which make up most of the Army of the Potomac. Well, between the battles at Gettysburg and the Wilderness, the men that he once commanded went from the size of a division to being nothing left. And as he put it later in the war, when somebody asked about his old command, wait a minute, were you a divisional commander? Wait, why'd you end up becoming a brigade commander? He responded with, I had a division of regulars once. I buried half of them at Gettysburg and the other half in the Wilderness. There's no regulars left. And that kind of gives you an idea how brutal this fighting was in Saunders Field. You're kind of watching the old guard of the Army of the Potomac melt away in front of the Confederates. The Iron Brigade, the famous Iron Brigade, is out here fighting just south of Saunders Field in the forest. It's the first time people see the Iron Brigade breaking and running because they just don't have enough numbers to bear as Confederates. Richard Ewell is sending reinforcements to strengthen his line on the west side of Saunders Field. Fighting is going to start moving down south of Saunders Field, and there's a moment of sheer freaking confusion. I'm actually jumping later into the day, but I got to bring the story up now since we're talking about the north end of the battlefield. There is a regiment called the 7th Pennsylvania Reserves. And well, they got lost from the rest of their brigade. And this kind of just shows, this is just a story that just sums up the Wilderness in a nutshell. One moment, the rest of the brigade's there. Next moment, they're isolated. All they hear is gunfire around them, but nobody to see them. Eventually, they bump into a group of Georgians who claim that they are surrounded by an entire brigade and that it's probably wise to surrender. So these 200 guys in the 7th Pennsylvania Reserves talk it over, come back to the Georgians who have a white flag, and they're going, all right, we'll surrender to you guys. This is completely messed up. To their chagrin, they find out they had surrendered not to a complete Georgian brigade. An entire Union regiment had just surrendered to 2 Confederate companies, like 100 guys. That is the confusion the Wilderness brings to both armies. And unfortunately, a lot of those guys in the 7th PA Reserve, they would not have a good summer. Some of them would be sent to Andersonville Prison. So yeah, Saunders Field is a complete mess, complete disaster for the Union 5th Corps. You're out in the only open spot in the Wilderness, which is not a good idea because now everybody can see you and your ranks. They're being cut apart by the Confederates who are on the west side. There's at one point, a Union artillery battery tries to set up in the middle at Saunders Field. Like they're trying to deploy their batteries. They're cut down. Then the Confederates try to make a rush on the guns, to which the Union sent out a regiment to chase the Confederates back, to which now the Union try to take their cannons back, but they're cut off because there's more Confederates around them. It is chaos. It's confusion. It is not a good thing to be in. Bad time to be Governor K. Warren and the Union 5th Corps. Well, by this point, Meade as well as Grant both realize they're in for the long haul. Their first major battle is happening here of the campaign is happening inside the Wilderness, which is not what they wanted, but it's what they've been given. And well, Grant's of the philosophy that there's Lee, go get Lee. And Meade's like, sir, I am surrounded by thickets. I can't see Lee. I can't see you. And Grant's like, but Lee's there. Go get him. So Meade goes, all right. There's an interesting moment that also happens because the 5th Corps, again, were obliterated. And again, you're watching the old guard of the Union Army just dissolve, melt away. You're shattering their legacy right here on Saunders Field. These officers, some of them, as we mentioned by Ires, had lost their higher rank due to the restructuring by Grant, are furious. And a general that knows Meade pretty well, a guy by the name of General Griffin, he is going to ride right into headquarters, which is actually only a few hundred feet away from Saunders Field. He rides right in, gets off horse, walks right past Grant, his superior, acting like he doesn't even exist, goes right to Meade and just starts unloading on Meade. Yeah, just like, you've just got all my men killed. What the hell were you thinking? Why would you do that? You shouldn't have sent us out there. And Meade just kind of goes there and just, just like, okay, yep, okay. You done? Can you go back, save the rest of your division? And, Griffin's like, walks off. So Grant approaches, he just watched his, he gets his first real taste of the dysfunction of the Army of the Potomac. Grant's just watching this, most likely smoking a cigar. And it's just like, who's that gray guy? To which me just kind of, that's not Greg, sir. That's General Griffin. Yeah, you just got to handle Griffin. Griffin, he can be a character. He says this to Grant while he's buttoning Grant's top button. And Grant's like, all right, this is how you handle your army. By all means, I will not interfere. So yeah, morning of May 5th, 1864, the Battle of the Wilderness commences in fury. The 5th Corps are put in a very poor location. Does not end well for them. They're upset. The generals of the 5th Corps are very angry at General Meade. But General Meade knew the enemy was nearby. He had to double check they were out there, and now quickly realizes and can report to Grant, hey, the Confederates are advancing on both roads and are threatening to cut us off. Probably a good idea we bring up our reinforcements. And that is going to shift focus from the Orange Turnpike to the Orange Plank Road. Now, you may be asking, why is it called the Plank Road? And this is something I just learned today. So the Orange Turnpike was built sometime in the early 19th century. It's a toll road. You have to pay a fee to use it because it's the quickest route between Fredericksburg and I believe heading down, I want to say it's Culpeper Courthouse. I could be mistaken on that, though. So sometime a few years after the turnpike was built, people were getting ticked off paying the tolls. And the local population thought they came up with an ingenious idea to make an equally superior road they would not have to pay for. That was called the Orange Plank Road. Wait, why is this superior to the turnpike in theory? Well, I kid you not, at the time, it was common practice to just lay wooden planking on these roads to give a relatively flat ride and then covered with some little dirt. So it is literally a plank road. There is plank underneath it. The problem with a plank road was, wood rots when it's covered in ground very quickly. That's going to add up costs. So it's a short-term solution, but long-term, not so much. In any case, Orange Plank Road is south of the turnpike. It's a nice bypass for the locals to get around paying the toll fee. And it's also going to be a very enticing route for the Confederate Corps of A.P. Hill to march to the northeast and try to capture the Brock Road. If they capture the Brock Road, they cut Meade and Grant's approach south. They will not be able to outflank the Army of North Virginia, and very possibly their whole mission, this whole summer's campaign, will have to be aborted if they can't go through the Brock Road. So it's a race for the Brock Road. And what do the Union have at their disposal to display Hill? Well, initially they have 500 cavalrymen. Yeah, 500 cavalrymen. I think they're part of the 5th New York Cavalry. I could be mistaken on that. I know they're New York Cavalry. And they're going to send this Lieutenant Colonel Hammond down, and they tell him, delay at all costs. But sir, I'm cavalry. That is a third of the Confederate Army. Yes. You heard about Buford at Gettysburg? Be like Sam Elliott. You, Hammond, you do your best Sam Elliott impersonation. Sam Elliott had 2 brigades at Gettysburg that morning. I got 500 freaking men against a third of the... It'll be fine. It'll be fine. So Lieutenant Colonel Hammond runs down the plank road with his Union cavalry, and to his credit, his men are equipped with repeating rifles, so they are able to slow Hill down a little bit. And I just now realized this is becoming a parallel of Gettysburg, the fighting on the Plank Road, because it's A.P. Hill's corps, the corps that started the Battle of Gettysburg, being delayed by smaller cavalry. And so they're trying to make their way up the Plank Road to try to capture it. Meade is scrambling to try to find reinforcements. He's trying to find anybody and everybody to plug the gap at the Brock Road. And he is initially going to reach out to Winfield Scott Hancock and tells him to get his second corps moving from Chancellorsville, get him to the Brock Road. Now, in theory, it would not be too difficult. If this was a normal battlefield, it's only 4 miles. They can cover that really quickly. The problem is it's the wilderness. You don't just march straight across land. You have to go down the roads to get there. So it is going to take time, several hours for Hancock to get to the Brock Road, Plank Road intersection. In lieu of him, Meade is going to turn to an element of the 6th Corps commanded by George W. Getty. No relation to the town of Gettysburg. George W. Getty is a brigadier general in the Union Army who really hasn't got a chance to prove himself. At one point, he was actually an inspector general for the Army of the Potomac. I found that an interesting detail I just discovered before he went live. I was just like looking a little more details because the story of Getty is fascinating. And also, Wrangler reminds all those tuning in, be sure to hit the like button down below if you're enjoying the stream, because when you hit the like button, you let the TubeView algorithm know that historical content does matter, that you do want to use social media to get edumacated. I know what I said. So Getty is going to get his division, and usually division, you're usually looking at about, 3,000 to 5,000 guys, give or take, and he is going to rush them. He's rushing them down the Brock Road, hurrying them into position to get there around midday on May 5th, 1864. It is not a moment too soon. When Getty himself arrives, A.P. Hill's corps, the front elements, are only about 100 yards away down the Plank Road. Getty, like the absolute boss he is going to plant his headquarters flag in the intersection. He's going to immediately tell his staff officers, you grab that regiment, you go down here, you take that brigade, you take positions on this side of the road. I'm going to take these guys. We're going to start building barricades in the center of the road. He's an absolute boss. He gets to prove why he was Inspector General. He is channeling his inner von Steuben. So, I'm your one like, yay. There's always, you be proud of your first in something, Bob. So, not a moment too soon, Getty deploys his division. These guys go running into the forest just west of the intersection. And by the way, the photograph to the right of Mr. Getty is a modern image from the National Park Service of the Brock Plank Road intersection. If you look very, very closely in the foreground, you'll see there's a depression in the ground. Those are remnants of earthworks dug by Getty's men in 1864, which is why it is very important we preserve these battlefields to tell these stories. I mean, it's one thing I can tell it here on the internet, and, there's no real limits on it, but it's another thing to be there in person. And I do hope one day to get down to this battlefield, because you're going to find out that this battle is going to be very consequential for how warfare is going to be waged to the present day. So here goes Getty's division. They charge into the wilderness, smashing into the front of Hill's corps. It is a brutal battle, brutal fighting. One of the units that go charging in, and not a moment too soon, is a brigade of Vermont regiments. And we have a quote from one of those soldiers in the 2nd Vermont Regiment. It's Private Wilbur Fisk. Just a little to the rear where our line was formed, where the bullets swept close to the ground, every bush and twig was cut and splintered by the leaden balls. So these bullets are flying all over the place. All this dense underbrush is either being stampeded over by the men or being cut apart by the shrapnel and the bullets flying through the air. They're firing at very close quarters because, again, you can only see a few yards to your front, not even counting to your left or your right. You don't even know quite honestly where you're shooting at. The only reason you know the enemy is out there is because all of a sudden there will be smoke and a straight line of leaves will just kind of topple down like you're taking a sheed fruit. You're taking a scythe right across it. Throughout the afternoon on May 5th, vicious fighting hand-to-hand is going to ensue between units like the Union Vermont Brigade trying to push back against the Confederate Corps of A.P. Hill. Smoke's filling There's areas where the forest is starting to catch, like leaves are starting to catch a flame. It is awful. In some cases, people claim that it was like hell itself had opened up in the wilderness right around here at the intersection. By 4 o'clock on the afternoon, after Getty's division makes a defiant stand, greatly outnumbered, but are able to barely hold off AP Hill, Hancock will finally arrive with his corps. And they'll begin doing a similar thing, racing away, trying to make their way, pouring into AP Hill's force, pushing them back a little bit farther, making a little bit of a safe distance between the intersection itself and the Union front line. One of the men that is actually going to run into this situation is a gentleman by the name of Alexander Hayes. Now, Hayes was also one of those guys that had been demoted in a sense when Grant reorganized the army, but he wasn't as angry. He was just happy to have his old friend in charge of the Army of the Potomac now. Grant and Hayes had gone to West Point, although they were a year apart, and they always kept close correspondence during the Mexican-American War and then during the American Civil War. And Grant, you have to remember, all this time had been serving out west. Hayes had been, at one point, a divisional commander in the Army of the Potomac. And in fact, there was actually a statue to Hayes at Gettysburg. He was very critical in holding kind of what was the linchpin of the linchpin of the hook in the Union line, which is Ziegler's Grove. So if you go there today, there's a statue to him. It's also because he's from Pennsylvania as well. That may be why I'm talking about him. Well, Alexander Hayes had been demoted down to commanding a brigade, but his brigade was in close proximity to assist Getty in defending the Brock Road intersection. So Hayes is going to get in charge of his brigade, and he's going to start leading them down. They're coming down into the flank. They're coming down from the north to the south into the left flank of AP Hill's corps, which is going to cause some problems for the Confederates. Hayes, while he's deploying his troops, notices one of his regiments, the old 63rd Virginia. This is the regiment he started out with, that his command began with. He was originally a colonel of this regiment. So he's going to turn and try to give them defiant words, try to cheer on his former regiment, his former soldiers. And then a mini ball strikes his head, killed him instantly. This battle is becoming chaotic, is becoming brutal. And as darkness settles over the battlefield, everybody realizes this is not even the worst of it, because more is coming. Reinforcements of both sides are moving into the wilderness, and there's going to be a greater fight tomorrow. And this is actually a sketch done by Alfred Wad. Technically, I think it was actually done the day after, but it gives you an idea of what this fighting is like in the wilderness. The wilderness truly is the great equalizer when it comes to dealing with military equipment, military advancements. It doesn't matter who has the biggest gun. It doesn't matter who has the biggest army. Once you go into the wilderness, it's 1v1. It is foot soldier grappling with foot soldier. One guy can make the difference. One guy is able to punch out another guy and walk forward. It's no different than if a whole regiment was able to take it. The wilderness is that confusing. It's that dense and difficult to maneuver through. And throughout I'm spoiling the story. And throughout the night of May 6th, we'll begin the first of probably the two most haunting nights of the American Civil War. And I know we probably we claim that, loosely, every battle, this is the most haunting night. Gettysburg, every night, you can argue that, but I mean that seriously. The nights of May 5th and 6th on the wilderness battlefield, they leave some horrifying ramifications, because nobody quite knows where everybody's at. Remember I mentioned earlier what had happened to the 7th Pennsylvania Reserves? They got captured by only 2 Confederate companies because they thought they were surrounded by larger numbers. That's happening all over the place. I heard of a story, I think it was the 11th Massachusetts, if I could be mistaken. The 11th Massachusetts were starting to run low on ammunition. So they run to the back, they go to the rear of the army to go get resupplied. Well, when these ammunition boxes came up, they were issued the wrong caliber. They would not fit in the barrels of their muskets. So they had to run these ammunition boxes back to the rear. By this point, the 11th Massachusetts are out of ammunition, kind of really just holding the Confederates back with bayonets. Run these ammunition boxes back to only find that while they're the right caliber, they're the wrong type of projectile. I think they wanted just musket ball, but instead they gave them buckshot. But at this point, nobody cared. They loaded all this buckshot in and just started blazing away, which is only really useful at close quarters. Granted, they are fighting at very close quarters. So this wilderness just creates sheer confusion on both sides. People are trying to figure out where everybody is. So you had these two isolated battles on May 5th. It wasn't one battle line. To the northwest, you had the fighting in Saunders Field, and then to the southeast, you had the fighting around the Brock Road intersection. But as those isolated battles progressed, the battle lines are moving farther and farther away from these clearings as they're trying to find a way to outflank the enemy. But they don't know where they don't know where their friends or their enemies are. So like tendrils just aimlessly out in the wilderness. So you have these soldiers that are just missing. They don't know where they're at. They're in no man's land. And it's probably best that they don't leave the position they're in, because if they walk a little too far, they may walk right into a sentry. And that sentry, be it friendly or being an adversary, because it's dark, because it's the forest, can't tell who is Confederate and who is Union. And I will say, there is actually a very small budget, but really fascinating movie that taps into the horror of the night at the wilderness. It's called Wicked Spring. Now, it's a fictional story, but it well dramatizes what these nights were like for these men. They were just awful. And it's basically about these 6 soldiers that come across each other in the night on May the 5th and sit down. They're like, it's probably safer we just stay together here by a campfire and don't venture out. And they tell stories. And the next morning, they discover that the soldiers are from opposite sides. And they don't know what to do, because they are with the enemy and they don't know where each other's lines are anymore. Fear ensues, and it actually ends pretty tragically. But I do recommend checking it out. It's a fictional story, but it's set during the Battle of the Wilderness. It's low budget, but man, they do a pretty good job with the material culture. And Fu Man Blues sends in a $5 super chat. Thank you very much. Scott's Odyssey is announcing to attach the bayonets. The bayonets, probably the most useful weapon in the wilderness. More useful than trying to gauge the enemy. So, we get to May 6, 1864. And what are Lee and Grant going to do? Well, Robert E. Lee, he knows that he's not quite cut off Grant's abilities to outflank Lee to the south. The Brock Road's technically in Union hands, but very close, barely hanging on by a thread. So Lee figures if he's able to get James Longstreet's Confederate Corps on the battlefield to reinforce A.P. Hill, that'll be enough to push the Union left flank out of the intersection, push them back toward Chancellorsville, and cut them off from any approach toward Richmond. That is Lee's strategy going into May 5th. As for Grant, well, he basically looks at Meade and says, wherever Lee goes, there you will go also. Okay, I don't think he literally stonewalled him like that. But that's kind of sensitive. Like, yeah, we're not leaving this situation. No, we're going back now. We engage the enemy. Very good. Destroy him. Please, destroy him. If you can destroy him in the wilderness, you will make me very happy, is probably what Grant's thinking on how Meade is going to respond to the situation. And as for George Meade, he's about the same way. He's on the same wavelength as Grant. He's like, okay, we're going to strengthen our lines. If there's an opportunity to take out part of Lee's army, we're going to do it. If not, then we're going to try to find our way out of this nightmare that is the wilderness. So May the 6th, early morning. Let's get back to my slides. Where are you at? There we are. May 6th, we're going to start on the left side. It's the same location, but the maps are going to change very rapidly. Around 5 a.m., Hancock is going to oversee a massive Union offensive starting from the Brock Plank Road intersections, moving to the southwest. I may have got some of my compass rotations wrong earlier. I do greatly apologize. But Hancock is advancing toward the southwest. A.P. Hill. A.P. Hill. He's a very troubled man. He's a guy who you look at him and his eyes reek of confusion. That's just my humble opinion. AP Hill got into a little bit of a spat with the other commanders for the Confederates the night before. Longstreet, he was told that Longstreet's coming to reinforce him. But nightfall, and Hill's like, "Where's Longstreet?" Robert E. Lee's telling Hill, like, "Well, Longstreet's a little bit behind on time. Reorganize you guys, get some earthworks put together, and hold out for the night." Well, Hill's like, "Well, if Longstreet's going to be here, I'm not wasting time digging earthworks." And Lee's kind of like, "Fine, have it your way. See what happens. You want to piss off the old Second Corps? Go right ahead, please, by all means." So also, but don't quite all by means, because we don't have a lot of soldiers to spend at this point. So Hill did not bother to reorganize his shattered units from the hard fight on May 5th. They kind of just laid on their arms where they were, scattered throughout the wilderness. So when Hancock has this massive line moving through the wilderness early May 6th, Hill's men go running. And they're going to run into one of the few clearings on the Plank Road. You can see it on the far left, the Widow Tap Farm. Lee is, furious that Hill did not entrench properly. So Lee rides forward to figure out what's happening. He's talking with Hill like, "You fool, you have doomed us all," type deal. Lee's trying to get Hill's corps to form some type of defense. They know they can't hold against Hancock, but the least they can try is to delay him until Longstreet arrives. So that's the morning of May the 6th in the Widow Tap Field. The Confederates are desperately trying to hold, and really the only thing keeping Hancock from just going full speed into Widow Tap's field is the fact that there's about a dozen artillery pieces that are out there in the field. And it's just enough to, cause branches and, debris to fall down on Hancock's attack. So it's not stopping them, but it is slowing them down. It's annoying them. And it's just enough for Robert E. Lee to find, looking to his rear, looking to the southwest, here comes a brigade of Texans. And if there is a brigade of Texans on the battlefield, it means only one thing, that Longstreet Corps has arrived near the Widow Tap Field. And Lee is ecstatic about this. It looked like in one moment, my God, my army is about to collapse. I'm about to be outflanked by Grant. Next thing he realizes, Texans will do it. And Lee, quite brazenly, decides he is going to lead the entire Texas Brigade into battle. And the Texas Brigade is horrified because, like, oh my God, Bobby Lee is going to get himself killed. This is not the battlefield you want to be on. You don't want your commander-in-chief to be in the front of the army during a battle to begin with. You want them very close, right behind the lines, giving orders, but you don't want them in front where they're an easy target. You also don't want to be in the wilderness. And you're going to learn later on today, May the 6th, that you do not want to be a general in the wilderness. So the Texans refuse to go forward, and they start shouting, "Lead to the rear, lead to the rear," to which Lee complies, rides off, and the Texans do what the Texans always do during a clutch situation in the American Civil War. They go running toward a brick wall. I swear, the Texas Brigade always have the worst luck. They're always in these situations where the Confederate Army's desperate, and they move at the double quick, smash right into a major Union attack and get absolutely mauled. And I do feel that this one may have been a little bit more than they can chew. But anyways, the Texas Brigade ram right into Hancock's attack, kind of stunning them. And then Longstreet's going to start deploying the rest of his corps in the forest. And that'll take us to the image to our right, showing the attack begin around 6 and 7 a.m. in the morning on May the 6th. Longstreet is now going to roll up Hancock. And to be quite honest, we got probably the two best corps commanders on either side of the American Civil War duking it out. This is pretty darn awesome if you're a nerd like me. Longstreet versus Hancock, the game is on. So Longstreet has his corps deployed on either side of the Plank Road. They're masked by the forest. Hancock's men can't fully figure out what's happening. Now, in addition to having the 2nd Corps and remnants of Getty's 6th Corps division, there's also an element of Wadsworth's 5th Corps division here as well. Wadsworth is trying to rally his men, trying to get them in the position. He's waving his hat. He's organizing. He's trying to instruct the men. No, hold them back. And then I've heard either it's an artillery round or it's a mini ball that hits him in the head. Wadsworth is mortally wounded. He will be recovered by Confederates on the Plank Road, near the Plank Road, and he'll die I think it was just 2 days after the fighting on May the 6th. So there we go. A second Union general killed near the Brock Road intersection. Remember how I said this is not a safe place, especially for generals to be in? So Longstreet is starting to roll up the Union left flank, the whole Union left flank, and even at one point, and you won't see in this illustration, notice in the far bottom, see a thing called the unfinished railroad cut? Well, Longstreet knows about this railroad cut because, again, these armies maneuvered near this site the year prior during the Battle of Chancellorsville. So, Longstreet's like, hey, remember that old railroad cut? It's time to use it. So he's going to start moving. I want to say he moves 4 brigades. I may be wrong on that, but I want to say he moves 4 brigades down this railroad, but I think that's too big of a number. He moves troops. What's important is Longstreet is going to move troops down the railroad cut, and then he's going to get them placed in the cut, gets them lined out. Now, they're in the cut, and it's completely surrounded by forest. So the Union left flank, McAllister's brigade, can't see them at all. And boy, McAllister's brigade are in for a major surprise. They're facing forward at Kershaw's Confederates pushing forward. Next thing they know, they see hundreds of Confederate soldiers to their rear. They're like, where did they? Run away, run away, run away. And the whole Union left flank is starting to roll back, collapse, fall back to their earthworks at the Brock Road intersection. Things seem to be going very, very good now for the Army of Northern Virginia. It looks like they're going to capture the intersection and cut off Meade and Grant's abilities to threaten Richmond this spring. Well, remember how this day, 161 years ago, it seemed like the Army of Northern Virginia was about to wipe out the Army of the Potomac, and then Lee's second in command was mortally wounded. That would totally not repeat itself on the same battlefield a year later. So, yeah, about that. If I can get the darn... This is how I want it. This is how I want it. So, here's the map showing it was 4 brigades. Interestingly enough, this railroad cut attack was commanded by one of Longstreet's aides, a Major Sorrell. If you've ever watched the movie Gettysburg, he's the guy that has the very nice mustache, and he's in like the very light blue uniform, is always at Longstreet's side. That's supposed to be a representation of Major Sorrell. So Sorrell gets this cool moment. He gets a command, a whole division, effectively a division in an attack during this key moment in the battle. But yes, one of the regiments that are involved in the railroad cut attack, I want to say it was the 12th Virginia. Yeah, it was the 12th Virginia. They get lost in the wilderness, which is the story of life of any private on either side of the army during this 2-day battle. We get lost in the wilderness. Well, that's pretty vague. Where in the wilderness? I don't know. I need to find where I'm going. So the 12th Virginia decide, hey, let's head west because the Plank Road's somewhere over there. If we get to the road, then we can figure out where we're at. So they start moving out to the road, and they think they're too far forward. They think they're up there near the Union line. They don't realize that Longstreet's men have moved, the rest of the corps has moved fast enough and have pushed the Union back toward the intersection quickly enough. So the 12th Virginia think they're in front of the Union. They're looking around for the enemy. And in the distance, they see what looks like a unit of cavalry riding forward, and they look to be Union. And people start firing. It's not Union cavalry, guys. Guys, we're in the forest. Union cavalry is not going to work out too well in the forest. Why do you think they're cavalry? Why do you even think they're Union? They're not Union. It's General Longstreet and his personal staff riding back. Hail of bullets erupt onto the Plank Road. Longstreet shot through the neck. He's going to fall off his horse. General Micah Jenkins, one of his aides, is going to be killed. There's at least 2 other officers killed. Several more are wounded before the smoke clears in this friendly fire incident. You had one job, not to mess up in the wilderness. Ah, you repeated on the almost to the anniversary, no less. You maniacs, you didn't learn your lesson from last year. And it was in broad daylight, too. Jackson, I got to criticize Jackson because he was out too far forward at nighttime. This is broad daylight. This is on the 12th Virginia. This is on the 12th Virginia. You maniacs! You blew it up. Now, the big difference from this incident to Jackson's mortal wounding, Longstreet would live, which I am always impressed by because, again, he took a bullet through the front of his neck and it went clear through the back. He will make a full recovery. The Lee is not going to have his old warhorse until the final months of the American Civil War. And that is going to have great consequences on the leadership of the Army of Northern Virginia. Now, when Lee gets word that Longstreet's wounded, of course, he is just probably saying what I just said, like, how? Why does Providence deem that every time we fight in the wilderness, when we're so close to victory in the wilderness, I have to lose my second in command? In any case, Lee will take charge of Longstreet's corps personally and is going to oversee renewed attacks on the Brock Road intersection. That'll continue throughout the rest of the day. However, they're not successful in taking the intersection. Getty and the rest of Hancock's men have done a good job in building pretty considerable breastworks. What I mean by a breastwork, I mean it's basically you take a pile of dirt and wood and you keep stacking it up. Sometimes you can put it in a crib. If you put some horizontal stakes in the ground and kind of make a crib to hold the rest of the logs. I guess vertical, not horizontal. It's the wilderness. I'm confused. And you usually can get them up to, sometimes they can go up to 3, 4, even sometimes 5 feet high up to the shoulders of these men. So pretty good, very crude, but effective barriers against enemy fire. And that's going to make the Longstreet's attack very difficult for the rest of the day. So the lack of General Longstreet being there, coupled with these breastworks of the Union have built along the Brock Road intersection, it's going to make it very difficult for the Confederates to break through. They will try. They will try several times. There are brief breakthroughs over the breastworks into the intersection, but they are beaten back. But the battle's not over. No. Grant has called up General Burnside. Because remember I mentioned on the night of May 5th, he had 2 isolated battles that really weren't tethered together. Well, Grant wants to tether the Union line, make it one solid line through the wilderness. And maybe this way, Burnside can either swing south to outflank Longstreet or swing north to outflank Ewell. At least he could box in a portion of the Confederate Army, in theory. Problem is, we're dealing with General Burnside. Yeah, Burnside, his men are there, like, I swear I read somewhere that they were just there sitting and having breakfast the morning of May 6th, just nonchalantly near Wilderness Tavern, while you can hear all this gunfire happening from Longstreet's attack and just going, I wonder what's happening over there. Huh. Anyways, this hot attack's pretty good. Burnside, by the time he finally gets rolling, he's lost. He's pinned. He gets pulled apart by isolated. He bumps into like small Confederate pockets of resistance. He presumes that it's whole Confederate divisions, and he really doesn't do much that on May 6th. He goes in the wilderness and stands there and twiddles his fingers. I'm being very harsh on Burnside. I'm going to be pretty honest. I am biased. I don't like Burnside. This guy, he squanders every opportunity he is given. It's one thing, to say, okay, well, hindsight's 2020, fair enough. There was all these things going against him, but he does this repeatedly in battles. And yeah, Grant's none too enthused of Burnside. He had heard about Burnside. Burnside had been fighting Longstreet, oddly enough, in Tennessee the winter before the Wilderness. But yeah, he's like, so this is why he wasn't able to take Marye's Heights. He just sits like a lame duck. So yeah, Burnside's a non-factor in the Battle of the Wilderness, even though he's on the map. And there will be one more action of the day. Actually, it starts earlier. It starts around midday. And it comes back to a guy by the name of John B. Gordon. Now, I got to say, I got to be careful when I talk about John B. Gordon, because John B. Gordon has a very, very checkered history, especially after the American Civil War. John B. Gordon will become governor of Georgia, and he's a very, very skilled linguistic, really good author at telling his side of the American Civil War. He also loves to embellish. He loves a good story. And he may or may not be a grand wizard of the KKK. So Gordon is one of them guys that you want to like. He does so much. It's like, man, this guy is like he makes out a good candidate to be like a hero in history. Just all the stuff he goes through. Gets wounded 5 times during the Battle of Antietam and lives. And goes on to become the second in command of the Army of Northern Virginia by the end of the war. But he also just does some very, very bad things that I just cannot condone. So I often talk about Gordon on the channel because he's in so many crazy moments of the American Civil War. He's one of the main characters. He's always rising his way up in the ranks, but he kind of squanders my ability to talk about him in a good light because of what he does later. So just want to put that out there on the record. I do not condone what John B. Gordon does later in life. I don't believe in his I do not support his personal beliefs. But gosh darn, when it comes to the battlefield, the man impresses me. So John B. Gordon, the day prior, had stemmed the 5th Corps attack on Saunders Field. And throughout the rest of the day into May 6th, he had been fighting with Richard Ewell, and trying to convince Ewell, please let me go lead a flank attack. Please let me go around the Union right flank. I can get around. Give me some other guys in command. I can take several brigades, and we will completely surround the Union right flank and destroy them. And Ewell's like, no, it's too risky. No, Gordon. Gordon, do you not see the death tally on the generals list? But it would look pretty cool. And Ewell's like, yeah, it would be pretty cool. And then they get reports, that, oh God, Longstreet's been mortally wounded. The attack on Longstreet's side is failing. And, Ewell's like, if you succeed as flank attack, it's going to look pretty cool. And it also may win us the day. So after much hesitation, Gordon's flank attack is authorized. And he's going to take his brigade. He's going to have command of several other units. And, oh man, I'm all over the place. Right. There we are. And if you notice on the very top of the map, you will see Gordon's brigade with 2 other brigades of Jubal Early's division. My apologies. I think he was actually fighting with Early over Ewell. But you can't blame me because Richard Ewell's the guy that did not take Culp's Hill. Anyways, Gordon makes his fierce attack begin around 1 o'clock, completely spooks elements of Sedgwick's 6th Corps. They start recoiling, falling back through the wilderness. And in fact, it's only the provost guard that's at the rear of the line with bayonets fixed. It kind of pushes everybody back forward. Like, no, where do you think you're going? No, back to fighting the battle. No. There is nothing to run back to. There's nothing but forest. There is nothing back here. You're safer up front. So Gordon's flank attack terrifies the Union 6th Corps. The Union 5th Corps have already had it rough the day prior. They're trying to hold back frontal attacks from Ewell's Corps. They're getting word, hey, the Confederates are coming down on our flank. Our flanks are the falter. The 5th Corps is like, crap. We had enough of the short end of the stick these past 2 days. And eventually, all of these officers, generals, I should say, they're starting to fire off letters back to Grant's headquarters. And they're talking, oh my God, Lee's attacking us from the left flank. Now he's attacking us from the right flank. Now he's everywhere. He's all around us, man. Game over, man. Game over. To which Grant makes a pretty famous quote. And I'm going to kind of paraphrase it is, I don't care if Lee is going to do a double back somersault. I don't care what Lee's going to do. I care what you're going to do to help me win this battle. It is one of the most awesome moments of Ulysses S. Grant's career. The double somersault quote, as I call it. It is great. And the rest of the Army of the Potomac commanders are just stunned like, this man is either the greatest or craziest leader we have. Yeah, they had to rename Fort Gordon and Fort Eisenhower. I mean, fair enough. Eisenhower's not a bad name. No, I'll take it. No, like I said, no, Gordon does some really, really just bad stuff. Personal beliefs, absolutely despise them. Right now we're merely looking at, I would want him on the battlefield because he'd help me win victories, but I don't want to be at a dining room table with him because I would, especially if there's a knife. Anyways, he's already dead. I can make that joke. So, Gordon's flank attack scares the 6th Corps as well as the 5th Corps, but Grant's stonewall reaction to it, just like, I'm done thinking about what Lee's going to do. I want to know what you guys are going to do to help me win these battles. That kind of turns the tide. And at the very least, it settles the Union battle lines for the rest of the day. And on both sides of the field, fighting is going to rage. They're going to be pushing into each other's lines, jumping over the Union breastworks, but each time the Union beat the Confederates back. And the sun sets for the second time over the Wilderness battlefield. Them little flames that we were talking about, they were being sparked because of all the sparks and that are coming from the muskets, from the artillery pieces, flaming shrapnel in the air. It's starting to catch leaves on fire, catch foliage. Well, by the night of May 6th, it's turned into infernos in several parts of the wilderness. And there are many areas where you can read stories that, unfortunately, there are wounded soldiers that are trapped and are not able to be rescued. And they would die not by bullets, but by flames in the wilderness. And again, this is what I mean by that. The 2 nights on the wilderness battlefield, the night of May 5th and night of May 6th, are haunting. Some of the most haunting descriptions you'll have at nighttime on a battlefield during the Civil War. You're having the cries of the dead, and it's not just people crying because they're in pain, but then come the fires, and you're seeing that demise coming towards you, and there's nobody that can save you, and you're there in the earthworks hearing it. It's the most helpless feeling these guys have to be enduring. It also doesn't help that if you're down by the Brock Road intersection, on either side of the Union earthworks, you just got bodies strewn all about from 2 days of close quarter back and forth action between the intersection and the tap field. Not good. Nobody was getting much sleep that night. By May 7th, both Lee and Meade were both they didn't agree on this, but I think they both were thinking the same wavelength that, yeah, I don't feel like fighting a 3rd day in the wilderness, especially after the night fires we just had a witness. That was disturbing. Let's not do battle in the wilderness anymore. And throughout May 7th, there'd be some truces to try to bury the dead as best they could, but they stay in their battle lines. And these are actually some images from the wilderness battlefield. A lot of these were taken the year following the battle. Gives you an idea of this second growth force they're fighting through. And to upset the TubeU algorithm in the lower right corner of the right photograph, yes, those are human remains. Those are skulls that were found. They were still being found into 1866 and 67, just laying on the floor of the wilderness. The 2-day battle in the wilderness would ultimately become the 4th bloodiest battle of the American Civil War. For the Confederates who are over on the left, 13,000 casualties had been endured. That's 21% of Robert E. Lee's army, compared to 17,000 casualties for the Army of the Potomac, 17% of the Union Army. Some particular notable losses. The Confederates had lost James Longstreet. He wasn't killed, but his wound was so severe, you ain't going to see him in command until the following year. And that's greatly going to alter the command structure for Robert E. Lee. Off to the right, you'll see some of the notable Union losses. And historians estimate 6 Union generals were casualties. 2 were killed, including Wadsworth and Hayes. 2 more were captured. 2 more were wounded, including George Getty was wounded as well during his defense, though he would also make a recovery, and he would continue seeing service in the 6th Corps. And that is the Battle of the Wilderness. At the end of 2 days of fighting, nothing was really gained. Robert E. Lee had succeeded in giving the Union Army a mauling. And if it was any other commander, we'll probably give them doubts about continuing their campaign. Maybe if it was another commander, maybe it was like a hooker, they would just go back across the Rapidan and call it a day. But the problem for Robert E. Lee is the Army of the Potomac is not only in command of an experienced commander now in George Gordon Meade. Meade has now fought Lee multiple times and is getting more and more confident. Meade is also answering to Ulysses S. Grant. And Ulysses S. Grant is at the field at all times, and his overall strategy is all encompassing. It always is putting pressure on the shoulders of the Army of the Potomac. There is no going back. We are not going to go back and get resupplied. I'll bring supplies with us. Don't worry. As long as we're near the rivers, as long as the rivers are on our west side, we'll be fine. Or my apologies, the east side. Darn, I'm getting confused with my compass. Darn. Grant's idea to end this war is not to take the capital of Richmond, at least not simply take the capital of Richmond, because he realizes what he's done with is a rebellion. And rebellions don't hinge upon politicians necessarily. They hinge upon armies. They hinge upon heroes and heroic stories. So as long as the Army in Northern Virginia survives, the Confederacy will exist in some capacity. So Grant's strategy is, I must destroy the Army in Northern Virginia. I wasn't entirely successful in doing that in the wilderness, but I did them a pretty big whipping. Again, 21% casualty loss amongst the Army in Northern Virginia. And the big thing to consider, Ulysses S. Grant can replace his 17,000 men that were casualties. And what he's going to do, and we'll talk about more in detail in next week's stream, he is going to pull from these garrisons all across the coast, protected against, potential Confederate raids. It's 1864. The Confederate Navy ain't going too far to raid these coastal positions. So Grant decides to pull most of these garrisons who are used to conducting heavy artillery drills and doing nice dress parades for the cities, and he's going to give them a musket. And he's going to tell them, you're joining the Army of the Potomac and follow me to Richmond. Grant's strategy is to bleed the Army of Northern Virginia until it's dead. And this was really the first big bleeding the Army of Northern Virginia will incur, the first of several consecutive bleedings. And, well, Robert E. Lee may have this false sense of his army's invincible, but in reality, the Army of Northern Virginia has less than a year to survive right now. On after the Battle of the Wilderness, a few days later, Grant is going to tell me, get the Army of Potomac back together. We're on the move again. It means like, okay, where are we going, boss? And they're going to get to the Brock Road intersection. And there's a very, very important moment. If they choose to turn left, it means the Army of the Potomac is quitting another campaign for Richmond. They are going back across the rivers and going back to D.C. Repeat. And that is what most, especially the guys in the 5th Corps, are anticipating after what had happened in the wilderness. They're thinking, here we go again. We'll have to go through another. Even Grant can't solve our matters. They are surprised to find that Grant is instructing Meade to turn to the right, and that the Army of the Potomac is going down the Brock Road and is actually going south toward Richmond. A cheer goes up amongst the whole line of the Army of the Potomac. They realize there is no turning back anymore. Grant is willing to continue the war. He is going to stick by the soldiers and see them through many more rough patches ahead, many more brutal battles. But Grant is not a general that is going to quit on his men. There are going to be many, many more battles, however, between Grant, Lee, and getting to Richmond. And well, the next battle is going to be the third bloodiest battle in the American Civil War. It's the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse. And it's fought just less than a week after what had happened in the wilderness. Think about that. There is an equally, if not bigger, battle about to happen to this army just a few days after what we've just talked about. The Overland Campaign is going to transform the United States of America and is going to transform the way war is conducted, or at least how we conduct it in the modern day. And I'd like to thank you guys for tuning in to this talk about the Battle of Wilderness. The actual anniversary, of course, will be this weekend. It'll be August 5th and 6th. Okay, technically it'll be a Sunday and Monday, the true anniversary. And this is just more of an introduction to the Battle of the Wilderness. An hour and 40 minutes, a feature-length discussion on the Battle of the Wilderness, an introduction. If you want to know more about the Battle of Wilderness, I am actually going to show you as we wind down for the night. No, Dusty, I'm not ready for you yet. I'm going to show you a bit about just a few different videos you can watch. So if you guys, excuse me for one moment, I'm going to put our end titles on loop for a bit. We're not done yet. We're not done, but I have to take a brief pause as I got to go pull up some links. Be right back.
Boys will really once again shouting the battle cry of freedom. We will really from the hillside, all together from the plain, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitors, up with the stars. We will reel around the flag, boys will really once again shouting the battle cry of freedom. Springing to the goal of your brothers born before, shouting the battle cry of freedom. And we'll come from the ranks with 1,000,000 free more, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitors, up with the stars. We will really from the flag, boys, and really once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. True and brave, shouting the battle cry of freedom.
All right, we are back, guys. Thank you for pausing there for a moment. I'm actually streaming through Microsoft Edge tonight just because sometimes I get better reception out of it. But that meant I had to move all the links over from my other browser. It was a whole thing. Oh, you thought I was done. I'm not done. It's the after show, Wrangler. You fool. You've fallen into my trap. So yeah, if you want to know a bit more about the Battle of the Wilderness and the overarching Wilderness Campaign, I am going to pull up this tab here. Please play. There we are. First things first, something I want to guys understand. The battlefield for the Wilderness is technically preserved as part of the Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania battlefields, which is part of the National Park Service. They preserve 4 battlefields, the sites of battles at Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, the Wilderness, and Spotsylvania Courthouse, which the last one will be talked about next week. But the Wilderness, sadly, is one of the most endangered battlefields in the country. It's one of the most endangered sites in the country. And the reason is Fredericksburg's a big college town today. It sits, again, right between D.C. and Richmond. So Fredericksburg area is a big bedroom community, which means there are housing projects constantly expanding throughout the Fredericksburg area. And unfortunately, that means, a uncharted wilderness, no longer needed. We'll just cut that all up and turn it into housing. So what the National Park Service did for many years was they marked a road network that you can explore the scenes of battle on. They didn't actually preserve battlefield for many years for the Wilderness. And it's only recently that initiatives have been taken to do that. And that's been in large part for the American Battlefield Trust. Unfortunately, just similar to the Manassas battlefield, the Wilderness is also under threat of data centers. This spring, Orange County, Virginia approved the largest land use alteration in its history, the rezoning of 2,600 acres at the gateway to the Wilderness battlefield. It's the same area where 16 years ago, Walmart wanted to build a supercenter before listening to reason and finding a more appropriate location. In the aftermath, the trust and its allies worked with the county to craft an overall vision for this historically sensitive region that would balance growth with preservation of open space. Sadly, this new proposal was worse, far worse, than the original big box development plan. In the face of overwhelming public opposition, officials approved the building of 5,000 homes and, appallingly, as many data centers and distribution warehouses as they can cram into 750 acres. Originally, this type of hulking, windowless development had been capped at 5 million square feet, but any semblance of a limit was lifted in the final hours before the vote, creating a material difference in the rezoning application beyond what had been considered by the county's professional planning staff. Data centers are necessary components in our digital world, supporting the internet and cloud computing, but through a confluence of policy decision, geographic convenience, Northern Virginia has become the data center of the world because it's near DC. More than 70% of global internet traffic flows through Northern Virginia, with more data center facilities going online every day. So it's weird, then in the 1860s, when the country fell apart the last time, the most intensive fighting was in Northern Virginia. They waged this civil war in Northern Virginia. In the 2020s, when our country's falling apart again, all of the flame warring on the Twitter and the hate book is happening, and 70% of it goes through Northern Virginia's data centers. That is some level of poetry. Kind of rhymes. Despite very real concerns about environmental impacts and a need for expensive upgrades to power lines and the existing power grid, neighboring counties are clamoring to tap into what they see as easy tax revenue. The trust and its allies are tracking many such proposals, but most utterly pale in comparison to the threat posed by the Wilderness Crossing development. Sheer scale of it threatens not only the wilderness battlefield, but also nearby Chancellorsville. And it goes on from there. So if you do not know the American Battlefield Trust, they are a big entity that they go around, and they're a non-for-profit that raises funds to purchase locations of battlefields. It's not just the American Civil War, but they also do it for the Revolution, for the War of 1812. And they're currently dealing with a big lawsuit right now. They're helping to bag a lawsuit against, was it Prince William? It was against the county that the Manassas battlefield is in. And you can learn more about that from a stream a few weeks ago. And a similar thing's been happening at Wilderness. So they're also looking to raise funds. Oh, we're using the bait. Now, I do like that philosophy, Scott, but it's all great until we actually get to the field with the bayonets, and then Readout Productions gets filed with lawsuits for, endangering the public with bayonets. No, I don't want that. But, I do like the sentiment. Fixing bayonets it will get a crowd moving. I have learned that. You have a big crowd during an event. You need to close up early. You need to close up. You need those crowds out now. If you have reenactors with bayonets, fix them. They'll get moving pretty quickly. That's some terrible advice. Don't use that in life. That'll put me in the brig. So yeah, Wilderness is one of the most endangered battlefields. It's all constantly under threat. So there's constantly projects being put up by the American Battlefield Trust, National Park Service, Central Virginia Battlefield Trust, all these different entities trying to preserve it. So keep your eyes peeled on the website, the American Battlefield Trust. I'll actually just send a link right to the trust. They're unrelated. They're actually starting an initiative right now, not relating to the wilderness. But interestingly enough, the American Battlefield Trust has started an initiative to save 15 acres of the Brandywine battlefield, which we just got to visit a few months ago here. Well, it was for me a few months ago. For you, it was 2 weeks ago in Retracing History. So check out the American Battlefield Trust. They do a wonderful job in preserving our shared past. Now, if you want to learn more about the wilderness itself, so not so much preserve it, but, learn more about its story, 2 videos I'm going to recommend. First, this one I just stumbled across today. This is by a YouTube channel known as Histories with Waffles. The audio's playing or not. But in any case, History with Waffles. Yeah, it's not a bummer. He seems to be a channel that's based out of Central Virginia, Northern Virginia area. He's done a lot of videos on battlefields that we're going to be talking about, including Spotsylvania next week. But he just about a month ago released an hour and a half video of him exploring the wilderness battlefield. And he taps into a lot of personal stories, talking about some emotional accounts. What I really like about Histories with Waffles, he has a slow but soothing way of talking. I definitely criticize myself that I can get really excited and kind of fly out like a Roman candle. And it can be a little difficult for some people to decipher what I'm saying. And I understand. I try my best not to. I just get really excited by telling these stories. But History of Waffles, he definitely got down the art of giving out information at the correct pace for the average audience. So I do recommend, if you want a bit of a more soothing discussion about the Battle of the Wilderness, please check out History of Waffles. He only has 1,000 subscribers, so I'd be really awesome if we can get his subscriber count up. I'm going to drop the link in the description below. So he visits all of the major sites in this video relating to the Wilderness Battlefield. The link to his videos in the description below. And one final mention, a documentary that was put together by Historical Films. I want to say it was in the late 90s. Historical Films back in the turn of the 21st century were contacted by the National Park Service to make a series of orientation films. So if you go to National Park visitor centers like Antietam, Fredericksburg, and you see their orientation films, and Chancellorsville, all of them were made by this company. They make fantastic documentaries. They did one for the Wilderness. I will admit it's a little bit lower budget than the other three. I sense they made this not for the National Park Service, but because they felt there was a need for a dramatized documentary on the Wilderness, which they're absolutely correct about. So it's a little lower budget than most of their productions, but it still has a really good information. All of the historians you would expect from the early 2000s are in there, giving wonderful insight on the battle. Highly recommend if you want the best accurate and dramatized account of the battle, please go check out The Battle of the Wilderness by Historical Films. And of course, I want to mention one other thing. Remember that movie Wicked Spring I was talking about? And guess what? It's free to watch on YouTube. So if you want to watch a movie, you want to watch a story that really taps into the horror the Wilderness Battlefield instilled into the soldiers that fought there, check out Wicked Spring. Came out in 2002. I'm going to drop the link. It's the last link in the chat if you want to go watch that. And I just realized both History of Waffles and Wicked Spring, their run times are shorter than my live rambling. I don't know what that says about me. Okay. We are officially winding down the stream. I'd like to thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed talking about the Battle of the Wilderness, the opening action of the Overland Campaign. The first time Grant and Lee kind of fought, because as we learn, Grant is not actually the general of the Army of the Potomac. He is their boss, and he's attached himself to it to make sure that his employees do a good job, but he is entrusting the daily operation still to General George Gordon Meade, who, if there's one thing you take away from tonight, remember, George Gordon Meade is the victor of Gettysburg. Let's talk about that more commonly than Robert E. Lee being the loser of Gettysburg. It's just weird idolizing the loser and not talking about the winner. It's just weird to me. Well, if you've not done so already, before you depart, please consider hitting the like button down below. Let the algorithm know you enjoyed tonight's stream and you want to see more historical content. And also, be sure, if you've not done so, if this is the first time you've joined us, be sure to subscribe to Readout Productions, either here on the TubeView or over on Rumble. I try to get a video out once a week, and there will be a video out this Saturday. I'm going to tease about it one moment. We do a wide variety of historical topics, but my passions tend to be American military history and American industrial history. And this Saturday, we are going to explore a site I have long been meaning to cover. We are going to what was the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club to talk about how a private resort triggered one of America's worst disasters, the Johnstown Flood. That's on this Saturday's edition of Retracing History, so be on the lookout for it. Thank you guys for tuning in. We're going to see you next week when we talk about the Battle of the Wilderness. Or Spotsylvania Courthouse. We already talked about the Wilderness. We're not doing this again. We talked about the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse. Good night, everybody.
Springing to the goal of your brothers born before, shouting the battle cry of freedom, and we'll come from the ranks with a million free more, shouting